Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm Living River Foundation founder, and I'm pleased to present a collection of talks and stories from our volunteers to help you write a poem in our competition. For our competition, we'd like you to write about the Medway and the local area. If you're going to write a story, please could you make it 500 words or a poem of any length. If you're going to do a shape poem, like Ali's going to tell you about later, please let us know what shape it needs to be printed in. We do hope that you've seen our photo collage with a number of different images. We'd like you to use those. Although our project is trying to raise awareness around litter, we are obviously trying to protect the animals and the people that use the estuaries. And you have a really important part of the estuary outside the Old High Street Intra. So please submit the stories and poems by the 12th of March so we can print them and send them out to the local residents. It may be that some of them haven't been able to get out very much, and we'd like to put some smiles on their faces. So you're now going to hear from some of our volunteers and from Ali about how to write poems and what estuaries are, but also why the Medway is really important and why we do the work we do on the estuaries here.
Good morning. My name's Kim, and I'm a marine biologist and a science teacher. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about estuaries. So that is a word that you may not have heard before. What is an estuary? I'm going to have you think about that. Let me go ahead and share my screen so that you can see an estuary. It might look familiar, it might not, but I want you to imagine that you're floating down a river. You look around and see the banks of the river, and the water that gets splashed into your face is fresh water. It doesn't taste salty at all. After a while, you notice you're not in a river anymore. Water gets splashed into your face again, and you notice that it's starting to taste a little bit salty, but not salty like ocean water yet. As you float further, you pass an island, and you notice you're suddenly out in the ocean. What was that place that you just passed through? Well, that's what we call an estuary. An estuary is an area at the end of a river that's right between the land and the ocean. An estuary's fresh water from the river mixes with the salt water from the ocean, and you get an area of brackish water. So it's a very interesting place where lots of interesting things happen. The Medway is an estuary. So I'm going to show you a picture of where the Medway is. So here we are. This is our Medway River. And this is where it empties out into the estuary, okay? The Medway River flows along 110 kilometers to the North Sea, and it empties into the North Sea with the Thames right here at Sheerness. So if you live anywhere in this area on this map, you live close to an estuary. We like to think about studying the estuaries, and why would we want to study it? Why are estuaries important? Well, they're important because that's where lots of birds and plants and animals live. And it's also important to people. We like to enjoy our time out on the estuary. Scientists like to study estuaries to make sure that they stay healthy. And we like to make sure that they're healthy for all the plants, the animals, and the birds, as well as for us, because everybody likes to get out and enjoy time on the water. I've been very lucky as a scientist and a marine biologist and a school teacher to study different parts of the estuary. And I got to study how people's rubbish ends up in the Thames and in the Medway. So when you don't throw something away properly, when it doesn't get put in the right bin, it frequently will end up in the river. So when it goes from the river flows into the estuary, and the estuary flows right out into the ocean. So that's how we get lots of pollution in the ocean. And I've been fortunate enough to go on lots of sailing and boating adventures to count all the bits of plastic that end up in the Medway with the Living River Foundation, as well as in the Thames. So when you are enjoying time out on the Medway, you can see these are some really nice pictures. So here's our map, right? This is the estuary, the Medway estuary, before it gets to the Thames and the North Sea. So you can see some really nice pictures here. This is going out of the estuary into the sea. You've got lots of different opportunities to see different areas along the Medway as it passes into the Medway estuary and before it gets to the Thames and the North Sea. So here we are out onto the estuary, right? Lots of interesting things to see. Beautiful picture from up above. And if you want to find out any more information, you can see right here, there's a nice video link, a nice internet link for you to look up more information about the Medway. And you can also look up the information for the Living River Foundation and about the work they're doing right here to help stop litter ending up in the Thames and to protect the Medway.
Hello, so today we're going to talk about how litter on the Medway affects wildlife and the rest of the world. My name is BONITA. I'm a sailor, a scuba diver and a paramedic. I love being in and on the water, and I love the wildlife that depends upon it, like the fish and the seals that live in it, or ducks that live on it, and the birds that live around it. What plastic do we use and how does it affect the environment? Last year, I got to go on an adventure on a sailboat in the ocean to see how the plastic we use can affect the ocean and the wildlife. Did you know that plastic can last for 450 years or more? If it is left in the environment, the sun and the sea makes it become brittle. This means it becomes weak and can break up more easily into smaller and smaller pieces. These pieces are smaller than peas. We call these small pieces microplastic. Microplastic can easily be swallowed by sea animals and birds. I found out about TANYA at the Living River Foundation because she had been on a similar adventure to me, on a boat in the ocean to see how much of our plastic is in it. TANYA now tests in the water in the Medway for microplastic. She also organises litter picks in the river, the marina, and on the islands in the Medway. The marina in Chatham is surrounded by restaurants, fast food shops, coffee shops, and supermarkets. When we pick up the litter that is floating in the marina, some of it comes from the nearby shops, like plastic drinks bottles and plastic bottle lids, coffee cups, food containers made of polystyrene and plastic, sweet wrappers, and other items like footballs, flip-flops, plastic toys, plastic bags, and straws. Some rubbish gets trapped in the marina, and this makes it easier for us to collect. However, there is wildlife in the marina. There's the fish, the jellyfish, and the birds that depend upon the quality of the water. And all this rubbish is harmful to them. We also find this rubbish along and in the river too. But the river is moving constantly, so the rubbish also moves constantly along the river. We've also picked up litter on Hoo Island, which you can only get to by boat. It is in the middle of the River Medway and surrounded by water. People do not live on that island, but birds use it as a safe place to live and to breed. You would think that if people didn't go there, then there wouldn't be much rubbish, wouldn't you? Sadly, that is not the case. On one visit, I picked up over 500 single-use plastic bottles in less than 2 hours. And there were many, many more, and lots of other things too. Can you imagine how big 500 bottles are? Bigger than me. The boat was so full up with rubbish, we couldn't take any more. That's very sad, isn't it? Especially when you think this is all harmful to the wildlife that lives there. It shouldn't and doesn't need to be there, and we can all do something about this. So how does plastic get into the rivers and the sea? Well, we can drop it on the ground, leave it on the beach. Some can blow out of full bins on a windy day. This rubbish, no matter where it is, can find its way into the rivers. The rain can carry it into the drains. The wind can blow it into the rivers or the sea, which flows into the ocean. Things like plastic drinks bottles and sweet wrappers are very light and can easily be blown by the wind. Most of the litter in the river and the sea is made up of these single-use items. These items may have come from your local area, or they may have travelled many miles down the river with the tide and wind. The rubbish that doesn't get trapped, especially the plastic bottles that are light, are constantly rolled backward and forward by the river tidal movements and waves, getting broken up into microplastic. The water from the estuary and rivers eventually finds its way out into the sea with the microplastic still in it. Once out at sea, because the water is constantly moving, it flows into the ocean, with all the plastic still being broken up into smaller and smaller pieces by the wind and the waves and the sun. That's how your rubbish can travel to the other side of the world. Actually, I saw this on my adventure. I visited a tiny island in the middle of the ocean. The beautiful sandy beach had so much microplastic on it, which had been washed up by the waves. All this plastic had been in the ocean for a long time, and it had come a long way. All of this plastic that starts here in Kent can end up far away and harm wildlife there too. So what do you think happens to the wildlife when our plastic gets into the rivers, sea, and the ocean? Well, they can get trapped in it, they can eat it, and they can accidentally feed it to their young. This is exactly what happens to the many types of fish, seals, and birds in the Medway too. So what creatures can you name that depend on the sea? Some of them are on this picture. Crabs, turtles, dolphins, whales, seabirds, even Nemo. And what about the River Medway? There are all the birds, the fish, jellyfish, and the seals that live in there too. Have you ever seen a seal in the Medway? I have. So how do you think that makes them feel when they eat this plastic? Can you imagine how it would hurt your tummy if you accidentally ate plastic? Like you, it would make them very sick, and that makes me very sad. So how can you improve the environment, and who can you get to help you? We can maybe use the 5 R's to help us remember. Refuse, reduce, reuse, recycle, and raise awareness. So let's talk about refuse. What does that mean? That's when we choose not to buy something in plastic. So we choose not to buy the drink that's in a single-use plastic bottle. Instead, we could use a refillable drinks bottle, or choose a toy not made up of plastic, maybe a wooden toy. Then reduce. How do we reduce the amount of plastic? Well, that's when we use something instead of plastic. So we use a cloth bag instead of a plastic bag. Or maybe we wrap our sandwich in a beeswax wrap instead of cling film. If we then can't avoid the plastic, we should try and reuse it so that we don't throw it away. So choose a container that can be washed out and used again, like a lunchbox instead of a bag. Next is recycle. This is where we need to make sure that our rubbish is rinsed out and goes into a recycle bin. If there aren't recycle bins around, take your rubbish home and put it in your recycle bin at home. And then how can we raise awareness? How can we get other people involved to help us make a difference? We could make posters for our local shops for them to put in their window. We could ask an adult family member to help you pick up the litter in your area. Maybe monitor the types of rubbish that you find and maybe publish it. It's not always easy to do all of these things, and we can't always do all of them all the time, and that's okay. But if we all do something regularly, we can make a difference. And the more of us that do something regularly, the bigger the difference we can make together.
And now we're going to hear from Ali. Ali is running her own competition about poems, and if you'd like to be considered for both of our processes, please make sure you tick the boxes in our forms.
Hi, my name's Ali Sinyard. I'm a writer and I'm here today to talk to you about writing poems. I'm doing a project at the moment called the Medway Intra Poetry Walk. So that's going to be an interactive poetry trail on the Old Street Intra in Rochester and Chatham. And what that's going to be is a series of QR codes on posters that are going to run all the way along the High Street. And every time you scan a QR code on your smartphone, an individual poem will pop up. So I'll be asking everyone from across Medway to have a go at writing a poem about the Intra area, what it means to them, any memories they might have of it, the experiences they've had there, if they've ever visited any of the shops there. I'm going to be asking them to write a poem or spoken word piece and submit it to the Medway Intra Poetry Walk. There will then be some judges who will pick a selection of the poems, and they'll be the ones to go up on the posters and be turned into QR codes so that when people are walking through the Intra area, they can enjoy all the poems. So now I'll be talking you through how you can have a go at writing poetry yourself. So the first thing to know is, well, what is poetry? And you'll probably be used to hearing things like nursery rhymes, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And that's an example of a poem. So on the other side of poetry, we have prose. Now, prose is what you'll see in your storybooks. It'll be long sentences put into paragraphs, and it will just run along the page. And it will be giving you information, it'll be describing a story, whereas poetry is separated by lines and it's very deliberately shaped. And the way that the words sound and the rhythm of the poem is just as important as what you're talking about in the poem. So another example, since it's just been Valentine's Day, would be roses are red, violets are blue, sugar is sweet, and so are you. And you'll notice that's a poem because the word blue and you rhymed. Now, not every poem has to rhyme, but if you're wanting to have a go at writing something for the first time, writing poems where words at the end rhyme can be a good place to start. So there are lots of different kinds of poems. You might have seen an acrostic poem before. And now an acrostic poem is where you take a word and you write it vertically down the page. So it might be your name. So if I was to take Ali, and I'd get a piece of paper, and on each line I would write A, L, L, Y. And then to write the acrostic poem, the beginning of every line would have to start with that letter. Now again, it doesn't have to rhyme, but it can do. Next, there are shape poems. You might have seen these before. Say if someone's written a poem about a snowman, you can write the poem so that it becomes the shape of a snowman. And that would be quite tricky because you have to start with short words at the top that get a bit longer and smaller to make the head, and then it gets even bigger to make his body. A good one to practice with if you want to have a go at writing a shape poem could be maybe writing something about the Egyptian pyramids. Now for that, you'd want to make the shape of a triangle. So to do that, you'd start with very small little words at the top, and then each line gets longer and longer and longer, so it makes the shape of a pyramid. For this, if you're wanting to write about rivers, as you will be for this project, you might want to write it so that it snakes down the page. So that can be quite fun to have a go at. Another one, this one's quite tricky, is if you wanted to have a go at writing something called a haiku. Now, a haiku is a unrhyming 3-line poem. It's based on traditional Japanese poetry, and the traditional pattern is for it to be in syllables 5, 7, 5. So a syllable is the number of beats in a word. So again, taking my name, Ali has 2 syllables. A word like cat would have 1 syllable. So for this poem, you're looking for one line to be 5, the next to be 7, and the line after that to be 5. So I wrote a haiku yesterday. You might guess who this one's about. I have a blue coat. I really like marmalade. Oh, and I'm a bear. So that's my haiku about Paddington. So if you want to have a go at writing poetry, my first tip would be to read. Read all different kinds of poetry, and also forget what you think poetry is. Sometimes we worry that poetry is only one certain type. It might just be nursery rhymes, but you'll see poetry everywhere. You might have seen poetry on television, where people have been doing what we call spoken word, which is poetry that's written to be specifically read aloud. Poetry is also in things like rap music. You might notice the rhyming words in some of the songs that you hear. So a song is, you could say, poetry put to music. So when you're reading poetry, try not to overthink it, just let the words wash over you. There's no right or wrong answer when it comes to reading poetry or writing poetry. So when you're reading a poem, just sit with it and think, how does this make me feel? Or what images are coming into my head when I'm reading this? Some examples of poems that might be good for you to have a look at could be things like Roald Dahl's Revolting Rhymes or The Owl and the Pussycat by Edward Lear. There's quite a famous, silly, what's called a nonsense poem by Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, that's called Jabberwocky. Another thing that could be really helpful would be listening to poetry. Sometimes when we're reading it, it might not come across how the poem sounds. Because as I said earlier, the rhythm and the sounds of the words are just as important to what the poem is about. So if you go on something like YouTube, you'll find loads of poems on there that you can listen to. So if you want to have a go at writing poetry, another tip of mine would be to just write what you know. Don't overthink or worry about what the poem has to be about. Does it have to be about some magical kingdom? It can be about your best friend. It could be about a favourite birthday you've had or a holiday you're looking forward to going on once lockdown has lifted. So write about something that you know from your experience. People write poetry because they're trying to communicate their unique experience or their unique perspective on the world to other people. Say, for example, you're wanting to write a poem about a green apple. Everyone knows that green apples are green. Everyone knows that green apples taste like apples. But how do you experience eating an apple? Is it fresh? Is it crunchy? Does it remind you of being in a particular place? And those are all the things that are what will help make your poem really unique. Another tip for writing poetry is it can be helpful to compare things to other things. So like I was saying earlier about the green apple, you're trying to get across your unique perspective on something. So another example would be snow. We've had a lot of that lately. So again, everyone knows that snow is white, snow is cold. So in poems, we might not literally say the snow is white or the snow is cold, but we might compare it to something else instead. When I wake up in the morning and I look out the window and I see snow covering everything, it reminds me of a blanket. So if I were to write a poem about snow, I might say the snow is like a blanket. The same if you're writing about a river. Again, we know water is wet. It's often cold. But what else does a river remind you of? What does the rushing sound remind you of? Could you compare it to something else so that when someone's reading or listening to your poem, they think, oh, I've never thought of a river in that way before. So again, it's about what makes it unique to you. One thing that can be helpful for you to do as well is when you've had to go at writing something, read it out loud. Because a lot of poems are written to be read aloud. So for my Medway Intra poetry walk, I'm looking for poems about the area that is the Old High Street Intra. So again, that's the area between Sunpier in Chatham and Star Hill in Rochester. So if you'd like to enter a poem for the Medway Intra poetry walk, have a think about what the area means to you. Maybe you've got memories of walking along the road in the summer, or maybe there's a particular building or a particular shop there that is special to you. The Old High Street Intra is also by the River Medway. So if you're having a go at writing a poem for this project, maybe you'll want to submit it to mine as well, which you are allowed to do. So have fun, enjoy writing poetry, and I look forward to reading your poem soon. Bye.
So I've come out to the Medway today, somewhere near my house. The Medway has always been really important for trade. We've made bricks and cement, carried hay and grain to London and into the Medway towns. Historically, we used to do this using sailing boats, and even our cargo was carried by sail. Now we use diesel engines, and in the future we'll use something different again. When we first started using engines, they were steam. Victorian ladies used to promenade up and down Sunpier with their parasols and their gentlemen with their hats, waiting for paddle steam day trips to Herne Bay, Southend, and even as far as Clacton. In fact, Sunpier is still used today for tourist trips to Southend. Fishing has always been really important on the Medway. We can catch fish like sea bass, sole and flatfish like flounder, but also shellfish like oysters. But even cockles and whelks are caught on the Medway and in the Outer Thames just beyond Sheerness. There are a number of families in the Medway towns that have traded with fish for centuries. The Medway has also a network of forts and beacons that protects us from invasion. Only the Dutch had reached as far as Upnor in the history of the Medway's naval fortifications. We hope this has given you some inspiration. We look forward to hearing your stories and poems very soon. Don't forget the deadline, 12th of March.